Hello and welcome to the channel. I'm your host, Bill. In this video tutorial, we will try to understand a very tricky JavaScript concept, which is this. This could behave differently. It could refer to an object, it could refer to a global scope, and in some cases, it just behaves in a very weird way. You might be confused. I've got you covered. By the end of this tutorial, you fully understand when and how to use the this keyword and how it behaves in different scopes. So, enough chit chat, let's hop in and let's get cracking. So we have a basic folder structure here, and which is that we have our index.html file, which is an HTML file, and then we're injecting JavaScript into that. We have a basic button, and then our header, which basically says understanding this in JavaScript. Now, let's start by looking at this in the global scope. In JavaScript, when you run code in a global scope, this refers usually to the global object. And in the browser, that will refer to the window object. So let's do a quick log of console log this. Log this, you notice that we get access to this particular window object, which contains all these functions. Now, usually what you will see in code is that we do things like alert hello, for instance, and then you get this alert message. But in actuality, what you're actually doing is you're calling this global object, and you're saying alert, and you're calling that function on that particular object, which is in our case is a window, and you're doing let's say a hello alert. Let's get rid of this. I want to say that, and we get this. So in essence, you use things like set timeout, use interval. They're all found on this global object. So you can see you have the set time interval, you have the play interval, and all that. So let's get rid of all of these and let's look at what this actually means in an object. So if you have an object and then you have a function inside that object and you call this, that this will refer to the object itself. So let's look at a use case for that. So let's say you have an object called user, and we have a name, and we'll say Bill. And then we have a greet function, and then we say console log, use a backtick, and then we say hello, and then we inject this dot name. So if you log, say, if you just say user dot greet, the message you get is hello Bill. So what this does is it calls the greet function and then does hello, and then translates or transcribes this greet to this object, and then gives you access to this particular property called name. So arrow functions behave slightly different, right? So arrow functions do not own access to their own this global state. So what arrow functions do is that they give you access to the surrounding object, this keyword for the surrounding object. So basically, if you have an arrow function inside another function, it will not have access to its own this, but it will give you access to the surrounding object. So let's have a quick example of that. So let's say counts person. This person is going to have a name of, let's just say John. I cannot spell John. And then let's say we have our greet function, right? And in this case, let's do a function, right? Let's do a regular function. And then inside that, we'll say const arrow, arrow function, and let's do this. And then inside this, we just want to do console log of backtick hello, and then we'll say this dot name, and let's call this arrow function when we call this function. So we'll say arrow function, and let's get rid of the 0. So if we come down here and we say person, I did not spell person correctly, right? Okay. So let's say person dot greet, and you notice that we get hello John. So if you notice, this arrow function uses this keyword here, which is this person, and then gives us access to this particular property. So arrow functions are basically great when you want to make sure that the this is inherited correctly. When you're using things like callbacks or event handlers, when you call things like this in that, you want to ensure that it calls the this for the object which is in that particular scope, the outside scope for that. So a quick way to actually demonstrate this is to do something like an event handler, right? Or an event listener. Now, what happens when we use this inside an event listener is that by default, this refers to the element that triggered that particular event. So let's get rid of this. And then in our HTML, we have a button. Let's give it an ID of btn. And then let's come in here and let's say const button equals to document get element by ID, and let's say btn. Remember that we're using document to get element by ID, but we can actually use this dot. So this is the window, and then a document in that window, and then we want to get this particular element. Now we can do a console log of btn just a button just for good measure, and we find that it gives us access to this, and then we have all the different functions or properties that are found on that particular button. So if we say button dot add event listener, and we want to do something like the click, right? Usually we'll have an arrow function or function, whatever that case may be. So let's use an arrow function for that. And then we can say console log this, for instance, right? Now, if we click this button, get access to the global state, which is the dot this, right? So it gives us a global state. Remember, we said that already. But then if we actually did use, say, a function, and then we say console log this gives us access to the actual button that called that. So arrow functions are a little bit tricky when we're looking at this keyword, but you have to try to ensure that you understand the scope in which you are. So arrow functions don't have their own this, and it inherits surrounding scope. It's usually the window. That's why when we did the arrow function, it gave us access to the window. But when we used a regular function, it gives us access to the button itself. So in classes and the constructor, the this keyword usually refers to the instance of that class, right? So let's do a class called user, and let's have a constructor, and let's pass in a name, and then let's say this dot name is going to be equals to name, and then let's come here and then let's say hello. We're using very basic examples, okay? And then let's do a console log of hello this dot name. So let's come at the bottom here, and then we'll say const user1 is equals to new user. Then we'll pass in the name of, let's say, Bill. And then let's create another user, right? So let's create user2. And what you notice is that if we do user1 dot say hello, and then let's pass in the name here of, say, Peter Pater. I'm not Indian, but let's go with that. And then let's do user2 dot say hello. Notice that we have two instances here. We have instance one, which is user one, and the this keyword refers to that specific instance. So it is not a global user object per se. And then when we call user two, it gives us access to second instance and gives us access to the name Patel. That's why you see here we have hello Bill in the first instance, and in the second instance we have hello Pater. Hope I said that correctly. So what if we want to manually control what the this refers to? You can use things like call, apply, or the bind, right? So with the call, we explicitly tell JavaScript that this should be, say, the person, for instance. So this works in the same way as you use normal objects and their functions, but it takes an argument, it's an array, right? So let's get rid of this, and then let's create a function called greet. And inside that function, we'll say it's console log. And then let's go ahead and we're doing this so many times that it's becoming boring, right? Let's say this dot say name, for instance, right? Let's name actually, yeah. So right now, if we say, if we call the greet function, we notice that we get hello, and obviously the value of this name is undefined. Now, when you use things like apply or call and all that, let's talk about the call, for instance, right? Let's say you wanted to call this function, right? Let's create a person, right? So let's say const person is equals to an object, and then we'll say the name is going to be John Patel. Let's mix a British name with an Indian name, right? And then if we then say greet, if we then say greet, get this function, right? And then we say dot apply, right? And then we pass in the person. What this does is that this apply basically subscribe to this person, right? So if we log this now, we then get hello John Pater. Pater. Yeah. So basically it gives access to the person object. So with the bind, what that does is that it creates a function with this permanently set, right? So here the bind will basically return a function where this is always the person, no matter what happens. So in this case, we can bind greet to, when we use apply, we can bind the person to the greet function, where we can change that, right? So with the difference between apply and the bind is that it sets that this keyword permanently. So let's look at that. Let's say this is going to be bind. We're a little bit messy with our code. So we'll say const bound greet. So we basically have to set it to a specific object, right? So at this particular case, the this for the bound greet will always be for that bound greet. So we say equals to greet, and then we say that bind. Now I'm going to make a video where I'll talk about call, bind, and apply. So we're just playing around with stuff here. So we say dot bind, and then we say person. So now we can always say bound greet dot. Now we can just call bound greet, and then we notice that it gives access to hello Patel. So call and apply work the same way. So if we get rid of all of these, let's go back. So we can actually do, instead of apply here, we can say call, and this should work the same way, right? So call and apply work almost the same way. So let's have a quick recap, right? This in the global scope refers to the window. When you're working with a browser, if you're working with Node, it's slightly different. In objects, the this refers to the particular object itself. When you use an arrow function, it usually refers to the surrounding scope. In event listeners, the keyword will refer to the element that triggered the event. That's but if we do use an arrow function, it will skip that particular function and can give you access to global state. In classes, this refers to an instance of that particular object. And then when you use things like function call, apply, and bind, it allows you to set this keyword manually. Congratulations, you made it to the end of the video. I hope my explanation helped. I was a little bit squeaky at some point, but I hope you got the message. If you did like the video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment in the comment section. If you would also like to stay up to date with new content that I do release, don't forget to hit the notification button. Until next time, stay blessed and in good health.